Let me just switch gears for a second and ask you just a little bit about Matt Gaetz, even though he is no longer the nominee to run the Justice Department because he has withdrawn. You wrote an article not about Matt Gaetz so much as, although it was about Matt Gaetz as well, but also more so about what you called the DC lobby and how intent they were on preventing Matt Gaetz from becoming Attorney General, and how they were kind of coming for him to destroy him, to prevent his nomination. I think the title of that article from September was, or last month, yeah, it was the DC lobby comes for it. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm sorry. It's from late 2023, after he sabotaged Kevin McCarthy and forced Kevin McCarthy out. But so it was the DC lobby is coming for Matt Gaetz. So this was not part of the nomination, but it was just sort of this lingering, widespread hatred for him in this attempt to destroy him. What did you mean by the DC lobby coming for Matt Gaetz, and why were they doing that?
Well, look, it's very well known that he's hated by some of his colleagues.
Right.
And, the kind of tabloid beltway press like to play up the kind of little petty insults that happen on Capitol Hill, the little subtweets that happen on social media. That part's not particularly interesting to me. What's interesting to me is that Matt Gaetz was the first House Republican and one of the only House Republicans to jump on the kind of Bernie Sanders coded movement of getting rid of PAC donations, saying no to lobbyist donations, no to leadership PAC donations, no to any of the kind of corporate money that sloshes around DC that funds both parties. He's rebuked his party on many key votes, fighting leadership on arms to Yemen, on, he led the opposition earlier this year among Republicans on voting against the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, encoding the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which essentially outlaws discourages certain criticism of Israel. He's fought with House progressives on non-compete agreements, on antitrust, on breaking up the big tech monopolies, on vote after vote on corporate copyright law, and on many kind of very esoteric issues that have to do with worker power and corporate power and anti-competitive policy. He's broken with the swamp, with the DC political leadership of the Republican Party, and that's upset a lot of the kind of established powers to be. So, that was kind of laid out in this piece from last year when he led the revolt against Kevin McCarthy. But it's just as true today, where you see a lot of the folks who are, tweeting out and promoting anti-Matt Gaetz stories, promoting kind of, sexual allegations against Matt Gaetz. If you actually looked at their bios, who are these people? Several of them were working for the tech lobby, people who work at groups funded by Google. Matt Gaetz has really led the effort to encourage the continued prosecution of Google under antitrust law. He's praised what the Biden administration has done, kind of picking up the torch from what the Trump administration had started 4 years ago. And that has made him a very hated man in Washington. He walks around with a mark on his back, with a target on his back.
Yeah, he said, "I love Lena Khan," but also, he also has that same profile when it comes to foreign policy. He was adamant about the need to leave Afghanistan, to cancel authorizations to use military force. I saw him at war with Liz Cheney on several occasions in the House over exactly these kinds of issues, but also with pro-war Democrats. He has a lot of heterodox views that are very counter to the swamp's dogma and ideology. And so certainly at least part of the hatred toward him is motivated by exactly that, which is part of the reason why I thought that choice could have been so good in terms of its outcome. But I want to just talk about the sex scandal thing for a second. And it's still, a lot of the details are still emerging. We don't have the report yet that the Health Ethics Committee prepared that's supposedly very damaging. But one thing I do know for sure is that sex scandals are often the way that Washington tries to destroy the people they want to destroy for totally separate reasons. I talked on Tucker Carlson's show about how the response to Daniel Ellsberg leaking the Pentagon Papers was to break into his psychoanalyst office precisely in order to discover his psychosexual secrets and leak them and use them to destroy his reputation. It happened with Julian Assange. At the moment he became genuinely threatening, out of nowhere, 2 women came forward and said we had consensual sex, but I didn't consent to him not using a condom, and that became rape under Swedish law, which drove him into the embassy. Obviously, it was used against Bill Clinton, and now it's being used against Pete Hegseth. And of course, this is the thing that has been used to destroy Matt Gaetz. There's a lot of murkiness on this issue, on the whole sex scandal issue. And as I said, I don't want to ask you to delve deeply or comment on it in detail because there's still a lot known. But is it your sense that had Matt Gaetz been different than what he is, had he been a swamp creature, had he been somebody who just sort of went along, that there would have been a lot less interest in this sex scandal than there was when it was needed to prevent him from taking over the Justice Department?
Well, of course, and actually, speaking of Pete Hegseth, I mean, much more damaging, much more serious allegations against Pete Hegseth, but I would say, I don't know, I haven't run the numbers, but maybe 100 to 1 in terms of media coverage on Matt Gaetz. And I think part of that comes down to power and who Matt Gaetz has pissed off over the years, the established interest groups that he threatens with his kind of policy platform. I think that kind of reflects that reality. And, I would go even further back than the list that you mentioned. I mentioned Ralph Nader earlier, when he came out with his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, looking at kind of the known design problems in the automobile industry that were killing people. General Motors had kind of worked with trying to frame him with a sex worker or something of that nature. And so, this is a tried and true playbook from the corporate and kind of political elite to use this kind of sexual allegation, sexual innuendo to destroy their political enemies. And you're right, we don't know all the facts here, but the facts that are available here in the Matt Gaetz issue do not justify the rhetoric that you see in the political and media sphere. I mean, if you log in to Twitter or X or Blue Sky or any of these platforms and you see any mention of Matt Gaetz, people claim that he is a rapist, a pedophile, that he paid for child sex, that he's a sex criminal. None of, from the facts we know, none of that is justified whatsoever. There's this kind of trial by media, you're guilty until proven innocent dynamic that I find very unbecoming and kind of disgusting, actually. And you can't kind of engage in any policy-oriented debate, political dynamic, when this is what's overshadowing the entire discourse. Any kind of article I post about Matt Gaetz, I wrote another piece about him last week, just looking at some of his heterodox votes and his kind of more worker, small business aligned, pro-consumer policy agenda, which is very unusual for a House Republican member. And you look at thousands of responses to this article, and this person is a child rapist. He's a pedophile. I mean, it's just incredibly toxic and dishonest.
And there's so many more examples. Like obviously that was done with Brett Kavanaugh. And out of the blue appeared like decades-old allegations. I don't know if you remember this, but in Massachusetts,
the Alex Morse and Richard Neal. That you
for
covered,
people just to remind people that Richard Neal is even though most people don't know his name, is an extremely powerful member of Congress. He was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, which controls essentially the budget. And when this young gay mayor of a town in Massachusetts decided to run against him in the primary to primary Richard Neal, out of nowhere came this scandal that when he was 28, 29, 30 years old, he was talking to 21, 22-year-old gay men on Grindr, that he actually had gone out with them. And the same rhetoric was deployed against him, that he was a pedophile, that he was some sort of sex pest, even though all of them were above the age of consent. And then it turned out that scandal was, and all these left-wing groups ran away and to cancel their endorsement of him. And it turned out that scandal was manufactured by a bunch of slimy Democratic Party operatives who wanted a job with Richie Neal and who went to Amherst College and who helped invent that, knowing that that's the way to destroy people's reputation. And I have to say two things, which is, and I just want to get your reaction. One is that in the Matt Gaetz case, it's actually even worse than a lot of the other cases, because here the Justice Department aggressively and actively investigated Matt Gaetz to determine whether or not there was any evidence that he committed crimes. And it wasn't the Trump DOJ that did it, it was the Biden DOJ. And obviously they were eager to get Matt Gaetz. They leaked constantly to try and destroy his reputation. But at the end of the day, they closed the case on the grounds that there was no evidence available to prove that he was guilty of any crime. And yet this doesn't matter at all. It's not even just that the government never proved his case, it's that the government actively investigated and themselves said there's no evidence that he committed a crime. And then the other aspect that I think the reason why these weapons are so effective is because once somebody is accused of that, like Julian Assange gets accused of rape, or Alex Morris gets accused of, I don't know, somehow like pedophilia or being a sex pest because he was like dating 22-year-old gay men. Obviously, in the case of Matt Gaetz, and I've defended Matt Gaetz, like just on due process ground, I've defended Alex Morris based on the ground of nothing. You know what happens to you when you stick your head up and defend any of these people, which is you then get kind of smeared by the same tactic, like, oh, he must be defending Matt Gaetz because he's a pedophile, and Richie and Alex Morris or Julian Assange because he's a sex pest. And it's a huge incentive for people to just kind of run away and not have anybody defending them, so that just the accusations themselves are enough to destroy the person without any due process or evidence required.
No, that's right. I haven't written anything publicly about the Matt Gaetz sexual allegations. And yet when I post a tweet or my story about, narrowly about Matt Gaetz's policy positions, his political positions, his beliefs around privacy or political power or business, I get swarmed with people claiming that I'm in support of sex crimes or I support pedophilia. It's a chilling dynamic. I think, I don't mind it. I've gone through the ringer a few times, but I think for most reporters, they see this dynamic, they don't think it's worth it, so they don't say anything. They keep quiet and they actively engage in this smear campaign. And for the Richard Neal case, this just for your listeners, one additional context. Democrats have talked for 30 years now about closing the loopholes that hedge fund managers and private equity bosses exploit, so they pay a lower tax rate than their secretaries. It's something that Obama talked about a lot, and many other Democratic politicians. One of the big reasons that never actually changes, even under Democratic control, is that people like Richard Neal, who is the top Democrat on the tax writing committee, is very cozy with big business and with those major donors. So, this effort to primary him from a more progressive candidate, from Alex Morris, completely concocted fake allegation of a sex crime, of grooming people or whatever. I mean, it was a honeypot thing where operatives were lying to him and manipulating these kind of like attempts at dates. And just to look at the reaction that so many left-wing and Democratic groups, after this, I think, very obviously fake allegation came out, they ran for the hills. They abandoned this effort to challenge Richie Neal. So, this is the part of the process of how the establishment stays in power. You wonder, why does the tax code never change, or perhaps why the ingredients in cereal never change when it comes to RFK or something else? It's the same kind of smear cycle. And again, not just just to pick up one other thread that you mentioned, it's not just that the DOJ aggressively investigated this and had many FBI agents, had the FBI agents even paying for the therapy of some of the women who were involved. You see so much other evidence. I encourage anyone who's curious about this Gaetz dynamic. Yes, we don't know all the facts publicly yet, but Chris Dorworth, a Florida lobbyist, was allegedly shaken down by a criminal in Florida, someone who introduced Gaetz allegedly to some of these women as this criminal, Joel Greenberg, I believe is his name. He was a local tax collector in Florida. He was using taxpayer money on crypto scams and pyramid schemes. He was using taxpayer money to pay prostitutes. He was abusing his office. He controlled the government office that creates IDs, and he was creating fake IDs for himself and for other people. I mean, just
including ones to make underage girls, like who were 17, look like they were above the age of consent.
That's exactly right. And so this guy, Joel Greenberg, after he's caught for his criminal enterprise, he attempts to basically shake down powerful Florida politicians and obtain a pardon from Donald Trump. And part of that effort included Chris Dorworth and Matt Gaetz and others who he believed to be close to Donald Trump. And there's a lot of text messages and evidence that there was a very elaborate scheme from Greenberg's family, which was very wealthy, and from Greenberg himself, to basically coerce and smear folks who would not join this scheme. He created fake social media profiles to claim that other people were pedophiles. He attempted to honeypot folks to essentially extort people to obtain this pardon from Donald Trump, and he didn't get it. Read the lawsuit from Chris Dorworth. Look at all the evidence. Again, not all the facts are known yet, but from the few facts that we do know, nothing has really justified the smear campaign that we've seen in the last 2 weeks.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.